Okay, we're going to get started. This is Morris Goins, Colonel Morris Goins, Chair of Honor. This rocker is the first rocker of Chairs of Honor in our presentation to an amazing American veteran, and this is his personal story. So I'm going to cut right there, and I'm going to have him introduce himself, and then we'll get into the actual interview.
My name is Morris Goins. I entered the Army in 1983, November to be exact. And I retired from the Army in 2017. I retired as a colonel, full colonel. And my last duty station was at Fort Jackson, South Carolina, and there I served as the Chief of Staff for the installation in Army Training Center.
So Colonel Goins and I have a direct connection to history and why we're wearing these Stetsons right now. So, and it's really the genesis of Chairs of Honor and why I'm actually doing this. He called me and asked me to build him a rocking chair because of our time together in Iraq, where we would sit at rocking chairs and talk about our lives, the dreams we had, stuff we would want to do when we got done with our deployment. So I thought it'd be kind of good to just introduce ourselves with the Stetsons on, but we'll take them off here and really get into your story.
Okay.
So do you have a family history of service in the military? And if you do, can you elaborate on that?
Sure. So my grandfather, my mom's dad, was in the military in World War II. Spent several years in the Army. And then my dad was in Korea. All of his brothers served in Korea. To include their sister was a nurse, an RN at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and her husband was a Special Forces guy, soldier. And then of my generation, I had one other cousin that went in the Army. I'm the only one that went in and stayed for 30 years. And then my wife's family is all military. Her parents retired from the Army. Her brother was in the Army, retired from the Army. So it's like a family business, but I don't think we ever designed to do that, but that's kind of what we did.
Do you have any family stories that were passed on that you would like to capture now, just so that they stay with your family?
It's interesting you say that. So I have two uncles that their stories that stick out in my mind. First was my uncle Alan Thurman Goins, was a Cobra pilot in Vietnam. And I remember as a child, probably 73, he was talk like this. And I never really understood why. And so obviously fast forward several years, I realized that he had been wounded in Vietnam and he had his jaw broken and it was wired shut. And so one night we're sitting at his in-laws and he tells a story. He's basically, and again, as fast as I can say it, he is a Cobra pilot sitting in the front seat, because a Cobra pilot, from one's in front of the other. He's in the front manning the gun. They're making a gun run and 2 rounds impact his helmet. One between his jaw and his helmet, and the other between his temple and his helmet. And so he says he remembers being hit, and then he remembers them taking him out of the helicopter. And then the next thing you know, he wakes up and he's in the hospital. Fast forward, so he tells me that story, I'm probably 10 years old. So we're talking 1975. Fast forward, I'm a lieutenant colonel in Washington, D.C., the Army AUSA convention. I'm standing there in my uniform, and an older gentleman to my right says, "Goins." I said, "Yes, sir, that's pronounced correctly." And he says, "You have any pilots in your family?" And I said, "I had an uncle, Alan, he was a Cobra pilot." And he says, "Oh my God, Alan." He said, "He's the best pilot I'd ever seen." He said he was bound for greatness until he was wounded. And he goes on to tell me about his gun run. It was interesting. So another uncle, Frederick Robinson from Tennessee, we used to call him Uncle TR, because at that point CBs were big, so his code name was Tennessee Runner. And about his days being in Vietnam, he had a pistol that he carried. It's a .357. I have it downstairs. You saw it. And how he was defending some of his troops on a couple of missions with that weapon. So when I came back from Iraq, when we were together, he gave it to me for a Christmas present. So I framed it, and it's, as you saw, downstairs over the game room.
Yeah. So what really caused you to say I'm going to serve?
Watching those two, they would come, and I say home because I'm originally from North Carolina, so they would come home, as we would say, and still do, I think, for the most part. So they would come home and it was like the celebration of, some famous guys. And then the stories that they would tell, some stories were hard, some you could tell impacted them the way they would tell them. But it was really the adventure, to go to foreign countries, to go to Vietnam, to go to, just the Philippines, the many places they'd been. And I was like, man, that's pretty cool. And because we lived so close to Fort Bragg, I could see paratroopers jumping, I could hear the artillery, and then I would see them road marching back from the drop zones back to the cantonment area. And I was thinking, that's a man there, because that looks hard. So I wanted in, and there you have it.
All right. Now, tell me about your service entrance. Did you go to the academy? Did you go through ROTC?
Okay.
Commissioning time? What do you remember? Is there anything that stands out about when you entered the service?
So I was a horrible student. So my grades in high school, I didn't even want to talk about them, and I'm glad I forgot most of them, to include the ones in college. So I didn't apply myself. So I wanted to go to VMI, Virginia Military Institute. Didn't study well in school, in high school, and so didn't even come close to the SAT scores. Were just in the basement. And so did not go to VMI. Went to the University of North Carolina at Pembroke. Thank God they accepted me. Went through ROTC. Because I had taken ROTC in high school, that afforded me the opportunity to take it, the program in college, just the first 2 years. So at 19, I was commissioned. I went off to the advanced camp at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I got commissioned in the United States Army Reserve as a second lieutenant at 19. Joined the reserve unit, did that for 2 years, graduated, and was allowed to go on active duty in 1987. So November 13th, if I recall correctly, I showed up at Fort Benning. As a 21-year-old snot-nosed, as they say, wet behind the ears fella that was ready to get after whatever was in his future.
All right. So let's shift a little bit about the daily life, because over a 30-year career, you're going to have a lot of different experiences about daily life. So how would you describe your daily routine to a future family member who may not have any context of military service? Regardless of where you are in your career, I think your day starts sort of kind of the same. It's always PT, physical fitness training, and that depends on how far you have to commute. So let's just say 5 o'clock. You wake up 4:35. Wake up, put on your PT gears. We say again, physical fitness. Put that on. You drive the post. Because I was a lieutenant and then obviously retired as a colonel, I would normally show up at the office. So I went in a little bit early to try to sift through emails as I got older, because that wasn't around when I first went in the Army. But would go through some emails. Then I went to formation, stand in the back as an officer, unless they do the commander takes over. Then I go to the front. We do PT, so that's everything from calisthenics, push-ups, sit-ups, run however far they're running that day. Then you leave formation, you go back, you shower, then you show up. If you're a junior officer, then you're out with the soldiers, you're out with the platoon, squad leaders, or company, depending on where you are. And that's where you spend the day. And then as you get a little bit more senior as an operations officer, as you well know, or a battalion commander, then you have more desk time because you're doing future ops, future plans, where's the organization's going, you're reviewing briefings, budgets, ammunition consumptions, those type of things during the day. But you still get out and sweat just as hard as the younger guys do, maybe just not as much. Sure. Let's maybe shift back a little bit to those first early training days. You got any funny stories that you would remember from either the basic course, Ranger School, any of those kind of things that stand out that were, something
I do.
You just laugh at right now?
So at the time it wasn't funny, but now I can look back at it and laugh. And so there I was in the basic course, young, 21, thought I could do anything and everything. So we are in the field, and I have my rucksack, and it's stinking hot in Fort Benning, Georgia. That's just the land God forgot, as they used to say. So I'm out there, and I'm looking for my rucksack, and I'm really tired. I sit it down, I get on my knees, and I'm flipping through the back top of it, open up the flap, and I fall asleep. And I don't know how long I'd been asleep. I woke up, and I'm just draped across my rucksack. And I smell this ammonia. And I was looking around, and it's dark because it's nighttime. I'm like, what is that? Where is that ammonia coming from? And I realized it's me. I sweated so much, man, till it was ammonia. So I took that uniform off and put it in a green bag and put it at the very bottom of my rucksack. And because I was young, came out of the field, threw it out on the balcony of the apartment I was in, and it stayed out there for about a week. And so when I eventually opened that bag, it was like, oh, just throw it all away. And that's exactly what I did. That's exactly what I did. Threw it all away. It was bad.
What was the hardest thing you had to go through to adapt to military life?
The hardest thing to adapt to in military life, getting out of the bed. I didn't like getting up in the morning. That was one. In Army schools, the lack of chow, food. Because when I was younger, I was a big chow hound, and so I did not like being rushed through the dining facility or like Ranger School, not eating very much. And so just the lack of chow was probably the hardest one.
Do you got any funny stories about lack of sleep? Or any stories about lack of sleep?
Oh, so Ranger School, there I was. And there was, I don't remember he had a German last name. It was almost dusk. And in Ranger School, everything's tied off because, you have a tendency to fall asleep and forget stuff and lose it. So, it's dragging behind you. So you don't, have to double back too much. And this guy walks out of the squad formation and is standing at a pine tree trying to buy soda, man. Dude, I started laughing at the guy, and I was just like, man, he's that bad off. And then so there's another time we stopped at a danger area. I'm on a knee, and I fall asleep, and I'm dreaming that I'm back at my mom's at home, right? And when I open my eyes, it's dark, and I realize, Jesus, I'm still at Ranger School. And it's like what little bit of morale I had, it just went by then. It was not a pretty thing, man.
Let's shift a little bit, maybe on into your career. And so how many deployments did you do?
Let's say I did a deployment to Bosnia. I did a deployment to, at the time, I'm not sure if we call it a deployment, but I did a tour in Korea for a year. I did 3 deployments to Iraq and 1 to Afghanistan. Okay. United Nations, I did do one of those missions down to Macedonia. So I did a United Nations, actually did 2. I did a United Nations missions as a company commander, and I did one as an individual augmentee.
All right. So what are some things you remember most about maybe your early deployments, and then we'll get to some of our common experiences?
Early deployment, they were fun. Because when I did the first one with United Nations, I was a captain, so I'm 24, 26, I think, somewhere in there. And they were just fun. I'm in the Western Sahara, I'm just south of Morocco. I'm on a United Nations assignment. There's guys from, Russia. It was actually the first mission, United Nations, all 5 permanent members of the Security Council had soldiers on the same mission. So there's Russians, the Chinese. So it was fun and unique.
How did you, in that time period, how did you keep in touch with your family back home, and how did they communicate to you?
Old-fashioned letter writing. You write a letter on whatever I had stationary. Because I think if I recall correctly, sometimes you would put APO which is an Army post office. If it was outbound, I don't think you had to put stamps on it, if I recall correctly. But coming to you, they had to. And so you could almost write anything on the back of anything, and APO would Army post office it and send it home. But that was it. It's old-fashioned, as they say, snail mail. So it would be months upon months sometimes before you get them. I'd get a letter. Sometimes it'd be 2 or 3 letters, and then you'd go a while without any. So it was always nice to hear mail call.
Mail call, I remember that being such a big deal for us.
That's right. That's right. Because at jump school, I was, at the end of the day, they'd call, it was mail call. And everybody's in formation, and as they say at jump school, the black hat would stand there and call your name out, and he'd throw your letter up. If you didn't catch it, of course, it was push-ups. But.
So when you think about all the places you did, places you served overseas in combat, how would you describe the differences between them in the context of what, personally, how did you view them?
So combat deployments, that's an environment all of its own. It's a combat deployment that's for keeps. Somebody gets wounded, somebody loses a limb, it doesn't grow back. That's for keeps. If somebody's killed in action, that's for keeps. If you fail in a mission, then the organization may fail and your country may cease to exist. So a combat deployment is for keeps. Make no stinking mistake about it. If it's a training event, like when you go to the National Training Center or down to JRTC at Fort Polk in Louisiana, you know, those are miles, and you can make mistakes and, you know, get rekeyed and learn a lot of things. And so those environments kind of shape. You take the exercises seriously, but maybe not as deadly serious as a deployment is. I think when you take those deployments, then your mindset kind of shifts and focus. When you're just at a normal duty station, then life is pretty good, and you laugh and joke and have a good time. And hopefully, did that answer your question?
I think so. It's really what you want to say about it. Can you describe your first combat experience?
Yeah. So
where you were.
So I went into when we went into Iraq, I was a brigade S3 for 1st Brigade, 3rd Infantry Division, the initial push into Baghdad. So I was always in the command center because I was the ops guy, and you know what that's like. And my boss didn't let me get out too much. So, you know, listening to the contact on the radio, having to expect to, you know, trying to make sure that the brigade stayed in the formation, and we had coverage with artillery and aircraft and logistics, and, you know, taking tactical pauses. I do remember the first time that we actually had some KIAs. And what sticks out in my mind, Rob Smith was the company commander, great American. He's at Fort Leavenworth now, retired. What sticks out in my mind is how quiet the operations center, it just went like deathly silent. And I've noticed that same thing occurs, that phenomenon occurs every time, even as a commander, battalion or brigade commander, the same thing occurs. When you realize that somebody had been killed in action, is how quiet that operations center goes. And the only thing that's transmitted is commands. All the laughter, all the where's the coffee, let me have some Jolly Ranchers, all that stops. And so that's what and then I thought about Rob and what he must be going through.
So let's talk a little bit about shifting into being in command and what it's like to be a commander. How would you describe to somebody what it feels, what it means, what emotions you feel or experiences you have when I say you are a commander?
Wow, that's a big question. It should probably be a class in someone's school. To be a commander, let's see, for those that have not spent any time in the military, I would offer to you, it's like being a dad responsible over a home. And you take that commitment seriously. You know, am I providing for my family? Do they have what they need? Am I, you know, how I respond to situations, is it helping my home or hurting my home? Is the vision that I have for my home long enough? Is it obtainable? Do I get buy-in? I think the difference between home, being a dad, and being a commander is the decisions you make, especially if it's in a combat deployment, affects people's lives, and not only your family, but, you know, other families. So if I make a decision and somebody goes somewhere and gets killed, and that's a wife, kids, aunts, uncles that don't have that family member. So that pressure is enormous. And I don't know of a guy or gal that doesn't feel it the minute they take command of an organization.
When you took command of your battalion,
Mm-hmm.
1st Battalion, 12th Cavalry, what was that like?
It was surreal, because I remember well, actually I passed out during a change of command, so I don't remember much.
Okay, there's a funny story.
Yeah, not so much, even now. So, you know, I wait almost 20 years to, you know, take battalion command, and you pass out in the ceremony. It was not cool, man. It was not good. But anyway, so to answer your question, it was a culmination of hard work and reward. Oh my God, you know, you realize that you now are entering a very small population in the Army, because not everybody is selected to command battalions. And so it's the honor of commanding the battalion. It's the realization of all the mentoring and all the coaching and all the nonsense. I mean, all your subordinates that helped you get there, their efforts were not in vain. But on the same token, at least for me, I take the colors, hand them back to the sergeant major, and the next day when you show up in that formation and standing there, you realize, okay, man, that was fun yesterday. Now it's for real.
Yeah. When you think about when our battalion deployed, and you can elaborate on this however you'd like. We didn't get an area of operations or a type of operations that we expected.
Mm-hmm.
So when I say what surprised you most about being in command of a battalion and going into Bakuba, Iraq, what surprised you?
Wow, what surprised me? First, when you go back, and again, trying to give context, when you go back to your training events, like at the National Training Center or JRTC, you have civilians on the battlefield, you have some, but it is nowhere near what it would be like showing up in, Columbia, South Carolina, or half of Charlotte, North Carolina, and says, okay, now you're responsible for this city, and there's 3 million people or 6 million people in there. You're like, wait a minute, that's 6 million people. I'm used to a couple role players. This is 6 million people with schools, and so the sheer challenge of dealing with a civilian population when you're trying to execute a war. That was the first one. Second was the sheer scale of the area that we were responsible for.
Talk a little bit more about that.
So when you say, hey, Goins, you and 112 show up and the Chargers are in charge of, I don't know, 80 square miles, all of it. What happens in it? Who's doing what to where? 80 square miles, man. I can't put one squad every 10 feet. And so then you have to sit down and do some analysis with the staff, as you well know, good operations officers like Roy is. And so you then say, okay, here's where we have to have a presence, because sort of kind of I can imagine what police officers do. Where is the major population centers? That's where we spend a lot of our time. And then you have to go make sure, as we would say, we go out to the hinterlands and just check and make sure nobody's decided to put up a terrorist training camp, or, take people out there and kidnap them, or whatever else they're doing that they shouldn't be doing. So those are probably the 2 largest that kind of surprised me.
When you think about all the experiences we had and how you want to account for telling some of these stories is really up to you. But I know, as someone who's part of the unit, we had many moments of valor in our unit. Is there one in particular, or are there a few in particular that stand out to you even today?
Yeah, there's...
What were those moments of valor? So,
man, it'd probably be hard to get through, but we'll give it a shot. So the first one is, I was in the top operations center, and we had contact. Charlie Company 112 was en route to their company outpost in Khan-Benny-Assad. And it was Alpha Company, Chris Conley, and they were a vehicle had turned over in a canal. That's what it is. And Chris Conley was in the operations center with me. And he said, I'm moving. And I do not recall how much time transpired, but it seemed like minutes. And Chris was there. I mean, it was like minutes. And I know Chris. I mean, Chris was, again, a great American, and I don't say that just because it's like a slogan. I've seen these cats tested. But he shows up, and he's, taking care of things. He's making decisions as a commander, because, again, he was an Alpha Company commander. And he came back, and he was just exhausted. I remember sitting in my office there. And he was mentally and physically spent. And again, typical, when people are wounded or killed, you, as a commander, you ask yourself afterwards, did I do all I could do? So Chris was asking himself, those standard kind of questions. And as his boss, unlike I'm doing now, you stiff upper lip and you listen, you coach. Because as a battalion commander and your company commanders, there's sometimes 15, 20 years difference in age. And so you're significantly older, much more seasoned. And so you listen, you coach, but you empathize with that guy, because the guy that he lost is yours too. And so you tell him you did the best you could, you did this, the enemy gets a vote. So that was one. And then the other one was Ryan Russell, he's a medic, was later killed in Iraq. And we come out of Warhorse, which was our compound, we turn left, and the traffic immediately goes sporadic. And we pull over, and there's an Iraqi police officer had been wounded. And so Doc, as I call him, he gets out and he's working on him. And so the FSO fire support officer is standing there, and I'm trying to call in a non-line medevac. And I see Adam, fire support officer's name, he did like this, which means the guy, has expired. And so I get out of the Humvee, I walk over, and Doc is, again, Ryan Russell, as I call him, he's standing there, helmets on, glasses on, and then he's with his head down. And I said, Doc, you okay? And he nodded. And I said, you did the best you could, and he nodded. And I said, that's all we can ask of you, man. And so I said, where's your gloves? Because he didn't have them, he was just his bare hands. I said, where's your gloves? I didn't have time to put them on. Okay. And then he said, should we put them in a bag? And I said, yeah, let's do that. So we put them in a bag, body bag, instead of just having the remains laying there in the open like that. And so we got a bag off the back of the vehicle, because everybody carried, body bags, as we call them, and put the remains in there and set them up on the curb. But watching that kid at 18 turn into a man instantaneously in front of my eyes, yeah, it was impressive.
Yeah, I think back to all those times where people just did their job, their duty, didn't think twice about it.
Nah.
Amidst of everything that we were going through.
A myriad of stuff. And that's why, when you say, a great American, because there's so many doing so many different things, all the time. It's impressive.
Let's maybe shift that to like daily life in combat.
Okay.
So what would you do to pass time when you weren't out in operations?
Oh, wow. That was few and far between. I would try to get away. Because what people, I don't think, realize as a commander is I'm human too. I don't want to be bothered sometimes. I mean, I'm older, but, I'd like to be able to play Xbox. Now, I don't play Xbox, but I'd like to have some Xbox time, maybe. And so just trying to find a place that I could get away and nobody would even just speak to me, man. It was precious. I remember one time I tried to hide away, and I was sitting on this mound of dirt, and a lieutenant came by, and he was driving a Humvee, and Moffett. And I wanted to say, what are you doing driving a Humvee, man? But I didn't even have that energy to even open my mouth. And he stopped and he started to talk, and I was and it must have been written all over my face, because he says, you need some time? I just nodded. He just drove off. But trying to find some time to yourself was, especially during the day. You get quiet time when it's time to go to bed, and you're just trying to go to sleep. But during the day, just kind of getting away.
So we'll kind of maybe shift to some meaningful relationships that you think about from your time in service. So is there somebody that you served with that you have really fond memories about? You can tell me about that person and why that person stands out in your mind.
Oh, wow, man. That's...
And maybe it's more than one.
The first guy, when you were talking, he's about a guy by the name of Frank McClary. He's a mayor here in South Carolina. I was not a commander. I was a brigade S3 when we went into Iraq on the initial push in Iraq, and he was a battalion S3. And that guy was phenomenal. And so I'll give you a quick story. So there was an 06 commander who will remain nameless. Called on the brigade radio, because I was the operations officer. I was there. I answered the radio call, and he said that he had either been in contact, the 06 had been the brigade, his brigade commander, and a captain he and his captain that was with him got separated. So I said, okay, give me your grid coordinates because we can, And he says, well, I'm moving. And now I'm thoroughly confused. You lost contact with the guy and you're moving, which in my mind said you left the guy. So now my blood pressure's up. I want to bust a hand mic because I was a younger fella back then and, so I just would let loose. And so, long story short, we now have this officer, I believe he was a captain at the time, way out in the desert. I didn't think he had a radio, in Iraq somewhere. And so I called Frank McClary. He was the S3 for 37 Infantry. And I said, Frank, I gotta have a turd for you, man. We have this captain, last known location is about this. I don't think he has the radio. And if he does, I have zero idea what frequency he's on. Can you go find him? And he found him. Yeah, Frank McClary's a good dude. And then, oh my God, there's just so many, man. Yeah, guys would just, we'll take you since you're sitting here. I remember you coming down to the battalion and it was a calmness. And I tell you this all the time. You're the most calmest, smartest, most caring, one of the most caring cats I've ever met. And an organization needs that. When all hell's breaking loose, somebody has to be that person. And it may be hard to believe, but even a commander needs to see it from time to time. Because again, they're human. They get tired, the weight, the pressure. And so, because a good human being is doing what you're doing. So it doesn't matter in and out of uniform, beard or no beard. A person is a person. Uniform doesn't make the person. The person makes the uniform.
Who had the biggest impact on you as a person, an officer, a soldier? Who's that person that you look back going, that shaped me to be who I was and am as a leader and a soldier?
I would probably have, if I had to pick one, it'd be my Uncle Allen. He was a major when he retired. He had an enlisted time. So when he retired as a major. Because I was young and impressionable. And I'd hear his stories, and he'd retired and had his own business, and he was just a cool guy. Well, with a lot of cool stories, and always seemed to be on top of his A game. Now, you're a kid, so what do you really know, But that's how he came across, even when he got sick and passed away. He was always calm, cool, and collective. And in fact, he gave me a poem when I graduated from high school, and it says the author is unknown. And the last stanza says, life's battles don't always go to the strongest or fastest man. But sooner or later, the man who wins is the one who thinks he can.
Let's shift a little bit and talk about what was the differences for you in being a battalion commander and being a brigade commander?
Oh, it was like night and day, man. Because as a battalion commander, there's a major age difference between you and the company commanders I alluded to a moment ago. 10 to 15 years, that's a big difference. It's huge. That's another generation, really. And so the amount of energy at least I spent controlling myself so I didn't get really mad and just completely blast those guys. And I say guys because they were all guys. And I used more of a coaching, teaching, and that's okay, we can recover from that. As a battalion commander was, and in some cases, because they're like, children, they all have different needs, requirements, and so some you would have to coach and mentor, others you could hit with a hammer and they'd be like, okay, I got it, boss. So you would have to spend, again, in some cases, more time with them because they were so much junior to you. As a brigade commander, they're only 3 or 4 years younger. So it's almost like a big brother relationship. They'd say, hey, I want to do this operation. And he'd be like, what about X? Does that make sense? Okay, that's good. That sounds 2 thumbs up. And so it was the age, because of the age difference is the battalion and the company commanders to brigade and the battalion commanders, it's just, it makes it much easier, I think. And as a brigade commander, I would always have to provide resources. Unlike a battalion commander, I would have to, for the most part, have to go to the brigade commander and say, can I get more aviation? I need more artillery. I need some this, that, and the other, because all that capability resides at the brigade. Where as a brigade commander, you're just divvying out resources, saying, not just, but at that point, you really become a resource provider.
So we have a saying in the Army, you know the saying everywhere, that the non-commissioned officer is the backbone of the Army. And you and I had the privilege of serving with many non-commissioned officers that we would say are the epitome of the backbone of the Army. Do you have some you want to tell people about that really, I mean, I think back to my first platoon sergeant, first sergeant, first class Pruitt, made me an officer. I was commissioned, I was a lieutenant, but he made me an officer.
Right.
And an infantryman. So what about you? Do you have non-commissioned officers in your life that you say, these are meaningful people that shaped me or helped guide me or made me better as a person, or made our unit better?
So when I first showed up at my first duty station in Korea as a lieutenant, 1988, platoon leader, I had a staff sergeant, Santiago, and he was good. But it wasn't until I got this old, crusty Sergeant First Class, Thomas Voss. And he was an older guy. He didn't run very fast, wasn't very good at PT, and I'm 21, and I don't know how, he's probably not my age now, but clearly. But he was slow, and I was just like, hey man, this, that, and the other. And so I actually had to sit down and counsel him, right? So I was almost like ready to pee my britches. Because this dude's like, he might as well have been my dad. And so I sit down and I'm all nervous, and he goes, sir, say what you need to say. I'm listening, and it's okay. Wait a minute, I'm counseling you, right? And so, we get through the counseling session, and he's like, sir, I got it. Everything you said is valid. He signed a counseling statement. He says, okay, I need to improve here, here, and here. I've got it, and here's what I owe you. And it was, Thomas Voss was a good man, but that's what he said. You got it. And I was like, oh, okay. So it was Thomas Voss, and then another guy, First Sergeant at Boston, when I was the company commander at Fort Jackson, a very solid, sound. Hey, sir, I know you're new here. Here's some things that he would just give you advice on, because they'd been around, they knew. They'd seen company commanders, they've seen platoon leaders, they've seen battalion commanders. Hey, sir, and then Rodney Dean Harris, who you well know, as it was the battalion sergeant major for us. I remember we came to a training meeting. He arrived shortly before I think I did in the battalion. And we were in a training meeting talking task and purpose, and he was like, so I'm not really, not up to speed on that as much as I should. And so I gave him some manuals, and he came back, and he would wear those platoon leaders out. What's the company commander's task and purpose, and how's it necessary with what the battalion commander said? And I was just like, oh, we should have never handed that to him. But he was a guy that would give you advice that was what was best for the organization. Even if it was going to get ready to rub you wrong, he would give it to you because he knew it was for the organization, and he flushed your feelings down the commode. Not that that's a bad thing. I'll tell you a quick story. So we were in the operations center in Iraq, and Bravo Company was in contact. Charlie Company was in contact. The Bravo Company commander called me first, asking for air support, and he said, and I rarely share this, but this is what he said. He's the company commander, who will remain nameless, said, "I'll say whatever it takes, to get help." And Charlie Company came up on the net, and I told Charlie Company to stand by, and I allocated the aircraft to Bravo Company. And Sergeant Major Harris gets up, and he's walking down in front of the TOC, and he looks back, and he said, "Bad call." And he's walking and down, in front of the operations center, so up on the screen. And I diverted the aircraft to Charlie Company. And before he walked out of operations center, he turned back and looked at me and goes, "Divine intervention." And he never broke a stride. But that's what and so you realize that, man, if that could have gone, with civilian casualties and all kind of, that could have gone ugly early, but that's the kind of advice that you need from your non-commissioned officers through experience and those kind of things.
Let's maybe talk about, and you can say as much as you want or as little as you want, but at least in my experience with you, our battalion had a lot of wounded, a lot of KIAs, killed in action. And that's a hard thing to go through. So what can you tell your future family about those experiences, even about the individuals, if you want to, that we had to endure?
I think the loss of a family member, a close one, is what it's like to lose a soldier as a commander. In the case of a family member, which I've lost to cancer, it hurts. I think the difference is as a battalion commander, and I think you were there at the time, Alpha Company was doing an operation. We sent Delta Company over in to help them out, and Sergeant Ross and Camacho and those guys ended up getting killed. And I was at a memorial and was told, hey, Delta Company's in some serious contact. And so I remember running over to the Brigade Operations Center. And so to your point is, unlike my cousins that I've lost to cancer, those guys died as a byproduct of my decisions and the plans that we drafted. And so that's what makes it, I think, some cases a little bit more challenging for family members. And thank God I don't remember the mother, because we had so many wounded and killed in our battalion. But she said, make sure you bring my son back. Now, thank God I don't remember the name. But I remember when she said that to me, I remember I was up on a gazebo and she said it, and I remember blowing like, man. And then when we got there, of course, then we were just getting our faces handed to us. You knew it was almost impossible. Now, as a platoon leader, you can maybe go through a deployment or combat without losing somebody. Company commander, but as a battalion commander, probably not, because the law of large numbers are against you. But it's tough because, again, when those guys were killed, I knew it was a direct response from our targeting meeting, us making the decision as commanders to take forces from Delta Company and allocate them to Alpha Company in that battle space. And they're doing exactly what they're trained to do, close with the enemy and get after them and do all those things that they're supposed to do. And so thinking that, should I have done this? Should I have not done this? Should I have allocated this resources? Should we have waited? I mean, all those things as a human being is just natural for you to, second guess yourself. And because at the end of the day, I remember coming back from that deployment on the last plane load and praying that I didn't see any Gold Star families on that field. And in fact, it weighed on me so heavily that I didn't even get my bags. When that ceremony said dismissed, I ran to the car.
What do you? We're gonna talk a little bit about advice you would give people. You are a type of leader that coaches people, just from my own personal experience. Which the beauty of that is that you allow people to grow into who they have the potential to be without telling them to get there. So what do you wish, what is it you would want to pass on to people that maybe future leaders of soldiers or military may not be? Maybe they're just in their community. What do you like to pass on to people about your time, either about your time in service or that you learned from being in the service?
My advice would be there's many roads to victory, many paths to victory. And if you choose path A, and I choose path B, and we achieve victory. And victory really is, in life, is an individual goal. And so the race is really with yourself. And so am I achieving and am I on the path to that objective? If I define path B as my objective and you're on path A, as a coach, as a leader, as a mentor, you should not be angry because I chose B. If I chose B, then maybe you ask some questions just for a person to think. Because when I went to the School of Advanced Military Studies, the motto was, the mind is the key to victory. We can teach you how to think, but not what to think. And so if your thought process is sound and you're looking into the future and you pray, and you weigh the pros and the cons, then okay, well, as long as you've, done some assessment, you've seen the pros and cons, I need to do this to reach that objective, and it's sound, then, I'm here for you. And, if you fall, I'm here to help pick you up. But to berate a person because they chose B and you're on A, who are you? Who are you, man?
Yeah. What's one of the biggest lessons you learned from your time in service?
One of the biggest lessons, and it's really out of the Bible. He who conquers self has conquered more than a city. And I say that because how I respond to things, even now, as a dad, as a husband, and even as a boss or a leader, sets the tone for those around me. And I can be a firecracker, I always have been. It's just I've gotten smarter. I've gotten smarter realizing that how I respond really sets the tone and the atmosphere. So I can go high and to the right, as they used to say. I can sting it, throw my helmet, get all mad, get loud. But at the end of the day, that's really not helping. It may be hurting the person's self-esteem. It may be hurting their thought process. And then I have to go back and pick up the pieces and start the whole, I didn't mean what I said. No, you meant what you said. You just didn't check fire before you open your stinking K-Coal, man. So controlling self is probably the biggest thing that I think I've learned, because again, you're given a lot of situations, a lot of environments, and then how you respond. I give you one quick war story. So I'm a brigade commander in Afghanistan. Company commander sitting next to me, Sergeant Walker, was an engineer. Stepped on an IED, lost both legs, one arm, and an eye, instantaneously. And so he is being loaded on a medevac. They're probably line of flight time, maybe 5 minutes back to Salerno. And so they land, and so company commander, she's like, hey, we got to go up and see Sergeant Walker. And I says, no, you get a cup of coffee and sit your behind down. You've got a squad still out there. Now, are you a doctor or are you a commander? And since you're a commander, worry about what the folks you have out there, because doctors now have Sergeant Walker, and there's nothing you can do but do your job. And that's easy said and done, and it sounds cool. It might get you your name clipped in a movie, but that only comes out of experience, man. Because when I was a company commander, I would want to do the same thing, although I wasn't in combat as a company commander, but as a battalion commander, if a guy got wounded, I'd want to go see him, but the fight's not over, man. Keep your priorities in check. And so, having the understanding of what it means, where I should be, the advice I should give. And so once we got the situation calmed down, again, as a big brother, I was like, okay, now we're going to go up here. So we get up to the aid station, and I tell us, now when we walk in here, it is not going to be pretty. You already know he's missing 2 legs and an arm before you walk in here. So you tighten it up. We'll talk to the docs, see if how he's doing, and we walk out. And when you walk out of there and we get behind these pine trees, you can let snot fly. I won't tell a soul. But while you're in that aid station, you best tighten it up, man. Well, I didn't say man because it was female, but anyway, you know what I'm saying. And so, that's the kind of thing that you realize that, controlling yourself is important.
That is important. So for me, there are words or images that are never the same. Common things that people see all the time that maybe they would call, people might call them flashbacks. They're not flashbacks for me. They're images that mean things to me. So mine is, every time I see a full moon, all I see are two Black Hawks silhouetting heroes coming home, flying up at full moon out of War Force.
We did that enough, didn't we?
With the hero flights and just that silhouette of two Black Hawks carrying our heroes home. Are there any images for you that aren't the same?
Yes. So I, as we were talking earlier, I normally don't spend a lot of time reflecting back over the Army. Not that I don't like my time in the Army. It's just, it's what I've done, what I did. And when I'm hanging out with guys like you, then we'll reminisce, which is always cool, because then there's things you forget or don't recall. And but to answer your question is, so Memorial Day this year, we went up to the Coca-Cola Classic in Charlotte, NASCAR race. And it was just awesome, man. We were on right at the entrance into turn one, and it was just so cool. And it was a Memorial Day, and the soldiers from Fort Bragg are there, and their C-17s are flying over. It was so cool, man. And they played taps. Oh my God, why did you do that? Huh? It's Sunday. It's like 5. I almost said 6:30. It was about 6:30 or 7 o'clock, somewhere in there. No, I'm sorry. It's like 5:30 because the race started at 6. So it was like 5:30. They played taps. Why did they do that, man? Huh? It was a great Sunday. I was having an awesome time. I'm seeing helicopters, and I'm like, oh, you remember this, that, and I can do, They played taps, man. I was thinking done. It was over. Tilt the pinball machine. Elon was like, we need to leave. And I'm trying to get myself together. Give me about another 5 minutes. I should be right. And what was interesting is, I didn't fall apart. Tears fell. And nobody said anything, which is cool because they probably realize this dude's having a moment. But it's the amount of times that we heard that, and the significance of hearing it. So hearing taps does that for me. And then when I'm in a grand event like that, and they play the Star Spangled Banner, or I see the flag waving, you realize that those attending that NASCAR are hanging out on a blanket of protection that people they don't know is providing.
That's one of my favorite sayings you used to tell us.
Blanket of protection. Yeah. In fact, it came from a movie.
Did it? I never knew where it came from. It's one of the favorite things you would say.
The blanket of protection. It was Jack Nichols.
Okay. Yeah. So let's kind of, we can wrap up. I want to give you the opportunity, if there's a question I haven't asked, or a story you want to make sure is told about you, not about anybody else, but just about you, that future generations of your family, you want them to know that I haven't gotten you to tell.
Future generations. Let's see.
Let me ask it a different way.
Yeah.
What do you hope the world will look like for your grandchildren and your contribution into that world? And what would that be?
The world would look like the two of us. Two guys that meet from different places in the country. They come together either at a job or at a church, and they unite. They're not divided by how they look, the accents, but they're united and they appreciate the other one. And so I think if I could dream and pray and hope for things like that, that'd be it. as far as my contribution, I think, you can't please everyone, and nor do I try to. I have an objective, and I have always been one, regardless whether it's the military or civilian side, to when I have an objective, I'm going to meet it. So the only question is, are you with me, or are you getting cut off the ship? Not that it's mean, but I have an objective for my family. There's things I want to be able to do for the future generations, that they don't stand in the same hole I stood in. It's we have some financial freedom, so they have some opportunity to do some things that folks that are in the community, they have the opportunity to do some things that either I have done, or exposed to, and I've shared it with them, so their families are in much better shape. And I think passing information, helping people think, passing the information to make sound decisions, and giving opportunities will cause people to, I think, have less worry. And then I think in some cases, less worry than maybe more understanding. Because everybody wants the same thing. You know that. I mean, we've been around the world enough to know that it doesn't matter if you're from the UK or Istanbul or backside of Chicago or, as they say down in Mobile, Alabama, it doesn't matter. Everybody wants the same thing. To be treated fairly, have a shot at whatever dream whichever path you want. And so I think I've tried to help people, once they're on the path, first identify the path, and then when you're on the path, just reassure you that you can get there, man. It'll be a little hard. There's some hills and dales in there. You might fall down, but you can get there.
So now, after leaving service,
Mm-hmm.
you're not a soldier anymore. Well, I don't think we're ever stop being soldiers, but
I'm with you. I understand.
When you re-entered civilian life, and you're like me, you knew nothing in your adult life other than
the
Army.
Right.
So what are some challenges, or what are some things about re-entering, quote, civilian life that stand out to you?
I think in the Army, I spent 30 years there. As they said in the movie with Morgan Freeman, Shawshank Redemption, I've been institutionalized, right? And so with that, every boss that I've ever had spent years, decades learning the organization. And they understood leadership, they understood how it worked, they understood what objectives we were after. We understood that there was consequences to not achieving, certain objectives, certain times. And so it's very organized, it's very nested, and there's really no lost movement. Now, in the civilian side, I would say it's probably optimized, is probably a term that most civilians would understand. So it's optimized to achieve whatever it's supposed to achieve, with the ability to be fluid and adjust to whatever circumstances. So almost like a cell organism that can move and do those kind of things. I think my observations has been in civilian side is the leaders are leaders in some cases, and they've never been trained to be a leader. They don't understand what it means to be an organizational culture. Sometimes they don't understand, hey, you may have to fire a person for the organization to be better because some people are toxic. And so I think in some cases they may cause, because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings, but yet what they fail to realize is you're hurting other people's feelings. And so by getting rid of one, the entire organization and environment would change, and then you're viewed in a different light, and they realize, hey man, the CEO or whatever position you're in really cares about the organization. That's one. And then two, because people don't have the years and the decades of processes, it's like people are hesitant to take criticism, because in the military you get criticism all day, every day, It's just, now it's probably a lot softer nowadays, but, and so, you get recommendations back, because in the military, it's a after action review, an AR, after action review. This is what you did well, this is what you can improve on. So it's an issue, discussion, recommendation. How do we get better? And so as General Cloutier used to say, lessons learned is not a lessons learned until behavior has been changed. And so I think in the civilian side, if there was a program or a system and organizations would adopt something like that, then I don't think it would come across, if a subordinate makes a recommendation, that it's telling the boss he or she doesn't know what they're doing. It's just another way of looking at something. That's probably the biggest difference and challenge that I find.
Yeah. Let's finish up with this.
Mm-hmm.
You're sitting in your chair of honor.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't you tell the story about why this chair,
Mm-hmm.
its significance to you,
Mm-hmm.
and what it means to sit in a chair like this.
First, it's my chair. So that in and of itself is good with me. I don't know about anybody else, but it's my chair. And so you all know, you know the story. So for those that don't, Roy and I were together in Iraq, and so we had these rocking chairs. I don't remember where they came from. They just showed up.
They were made by local Iraqis.
They may have been, and so all of a sudden they're there. But so in between our living quarters, we had a little patio, and these rocking chairs showed up. I don't even know where we came from, and so they're there, and we sit in them. And at the end of the day, we sit there and just laugh and talk about things that we had done well, things that we needed to improve on. We talked about family, just life, other than where we were there in Iraq. And I remember thinking, man, I sure would like to take this thing home. But you can't. There's certain things you can bring back from foreign countries, certain things you can't. And but I thought, man, I sure would like to take this thing home because we'd starting to kind of wear the hands down. It had a little dirt on it, and it's like, okay, it's really not mine, but I'm kind of like commandeering this thing. And so we got back to the States. I don't think we tried to bring them back. And so you and I was in Saudi Arabia, I think in January this year.
You were.
And so we were on the phone, and I was, you were talking, and I was like, man, you remember those rocking chairs? We were just kind of out there. And he's like, and I knew you were working with wood, and I said, man, could you build me a chair? Is that possible? And so I remember standing on I think I was on the 7th or 8th floor, standing out looking out over the city in Riyadh there in Saudi Arabia, and we just started talking, and here's the chair. And so, you talked me through, hey, this is what I'm doing. What color do you like? I said, well, try this. Can you put a cross there? And so over the last, 60, 90 days, and then you brought it today, and of course, it's just been a good time, and this is my chair, and I got my Stetson on it, which may hang on it forever now, and so it's
going to stay in your family.
It's going to stay in my family forever, because I know my son's going to want to sit in it, and I'm like, hey man, that's my chair. It's like, hey listen, not now. When I get to be 90, you might be able to sit in my chair, but right now, this is my chair. See, now, when you sit over here, you go from being the prince to the king, okay? But right now, that's me. So I want to thank you, man, for, first of all your efforts. And because it's always interesting to take on something. And as I've always told you, that you're a good man. So when you say, what does this chair of honor mean? And this opportunity to talk, because most people don't hear these stories. My uncles are all Vietnam, Korea guys, to include my grandfather, World War II. And the only stories I have are the ones that I can retain.
Right.
But we never captured it like this. Mm-hmm. And I think it's going to be very helpful. I'd like to see Leavenworth tap into it, because then you could do a smorgasbord of lessons learned. Yeah. So again, you always do it. Anything you do is first rate. And I'm not just saying it because you're here and you're like taping this thing. That's just how you are and who you are. So thank you.
It's my pleasure. The whole point of doing this is to preserve honor, and you're one of the most honorable people I know. I had the privilege of serving with, so it was almost. I almost would have done it for free. It's just that's the kind of person you are, and I appreciate the opportunity to bring some of them into your home that you will always have and cherish. And
always.
So
it's one last thing before you turn that off. It's life. Again, I remember my dad and his brothers' Vietnam and Korea days, and I remember seeing the movie We Were Soldiers Once and Young, and they interviewing the guys, not the actors, but the individual soldiers, and Hal Moore and all those guys, and even how as they were talking, telling the stories, their mouth would get dry. Again, I hadn't been to combat. I was a young guy, and I'm thinking, man, that's been like 20 or 30 years ago, man, and they're still. And it's interesting. So when we were setting up, that's the first thing came back to my mind. I'm like, oh my God, man, I'm those guys. Weird. Yeah, I'm now part of they officially. Oh my gosh, man, how much time has passed? So thank you. I've enjoyed it, man.